Jake Morrison walked through the crowded marketplace of Meridian Hub with wide eyes. Everything around him felt like a dream. Aliens of every shape and size moved past him, speaking in languages that clicked, hummed, and whistled. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made of light itself. The 17-year-old human had only left Earth 3 weeks ago, and he still couldn't believe he was actually here, standing on a massive space station orbiting a distant star. He was part of Earth's cultural exchange program, one of the first humans to live among aliens and learn their ways. His supervisor had given him the afternoon off to explore, and Jake was making the most of it. He stopped at vendor stalls selling glowing fruits, examined strange tools he couldn't identify, and watched street performers doing things that seemed to defy physics. The upper marketplace was bright and clean, with high ceilings and elegant shops. But as Jake wandered deeper, he found himself in the lower sections where the lighting grew dimmer and the crowds thinned out. Here the vendors looked more desperate and the goods were cheaper. Maintenance robots moved slowly through the corridors, and the air smelled of engine oil and something he couldn't quite place. That's when he saw her. In a dark corner between two closed shops, an old woman sat on the cold metal floor. She was hunched over, wrapped in dirty, torn robes that might have been white once but were now gray and stained. Her silver hair hung in tangles around her face and her skin looked pale, almost translucent. She held out one thin hand, begging silently as the crowd passed by. Jake stopped and watched. Dozens of aliens walked past her. Some stepped around her without looking. Others glanced at her with what seemed like disgust. A large creature with 6 legs nearly stepped on her outstretched hand and she pulled it back quickly. No one stopped. No one helped. No one even seemed to see her as a person. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. Back on Earth, he'd seen homeless people before, though not many. His mom had always told him that you could judge a person's character by how they treated those who could do nothing for them. She'd made him volunteer at shelters when he was younger, and though he'd complained at the time, the lessons had stuck. He walked over to the woman and knelt down beside her. Up close, he could see how thin she was, how her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes caught his attention most. They were a strange silver color, and when she looked at him, he felt like she was seeing right through him. There was something in those eyes that didn't match the rest of her appearance, something deep and ancient, but Jake pushed the thought aside. "Hey," he said softly, "are you okay?" She looked at him but didn't speak. Her lips were cracked and dry. Jake pulled his backpack off his shoulders and dug through it. He found his ration pack, the one he'd been saving for dinner, and his water container. He held them out to her. "Here, take these. You need them more than I do." The woman stared at the food and water for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took them. Her fingers brushed against his hand and they were ice cold. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse but had a musical quality to it, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "When did you last eat?" Jake asked. "Days," she said quietly. "Many days," Jake frowned. "Is there anyone who can help you? Any family or friends?" She shook her head slowly. "I am alone." Before Jake could say anything else, he heard loud clicking sounds behind him. He turned to see a group of 5 aliens approaching. They were Valorians. He recognized them from his training. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with crystalline bodies that reflected the dim light in sharp angles. Their faces were geometric and hard to read, but their body language was clear. They were laughing at him. The leader, wearing what looked like a military uniform marked with symbols Jake didn't recognize, stepped forward. His translator device picked up the clicking sounds and converted them to words Jake could understand. "Look at the soft human," the Valorian said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Wasting resources on a useless beggar." The other Valorians clicked their agreement, the sound harsh and mocking. Jake stood up slowly, trying to keep his voice calm. "She's hungry. I'm just helping her." "Helping her?" The Valorian leader moved closer, looming over Jake. "This is why your species will never survive in the galaxy. You waste time and resources on the weak. You value compassion over strength." Another Valorian stepped forward. "Humans are soft hearts. Primitive empaths who don't understand how the universe works. The weak die. The strong survive. This is the natural order." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. "Maybe we see things differently. Maybe we think taking care of each other is what makes us strong." The Valorians erupted in clicking laughter. The The sound was sharp and unpleasant, like glass breaking repeatedly. "Foolish child," the leader said. "Your species has been in space for what? 50 years? We have been traveling the stars for 10,000 years. We know the truth. Compassion is weakness. It will lead to your extinction." A small crowd was gathering now, other aliens stopping to watch the confrontation. Some looked amused. Others seemed uncomfortable, but no one intervened. "In the galactic order, there is no room for those who cannot contribute," the Valorian continued. "This beggar is worthless. You are worthless for helping her. Earth will learn this lesson, or Earth will die." The other Valorians clicked their approval. One of them made a dismissive gesture at the old woman, as if she were garbage to be swept away. Jake clenched his fists but didn't move. His mom's voice echoed in his head, telling him to stay calm, to be the bigger person. "I don't care what you think," he said quietly. "I'm going to help her anyway." The Valorian leader leaned down until his crystalline face was inches from Jake's. "Then you are a fool, and your species is doomed." They walked away, still clicking with laughter. The crowd dispersed, some aliens shaking their heads, others looking at Jake with what might have been pity. Within minutes, it was just Jake and the old woman again. Jake let out a long breath and turned back to her. She was watching him with those strange silver eyes, and there was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read. It almost looked like satisfaction, but that didn't make sense. "Don't listen to them," Jake said. "They're just bullies." "You were brave," the woman said. Her voice was stronger now, less hoarse. "You defended me even when they mocked you." "It's nothing," Jake said. He pulled out his communication device and checked the station map. "There's a medical station about 10 minutes from here. Let me help you get there. They should be able to give you food and a place to rest." The woman started to protest, but Jake gently took her arm and helped her stand. She was lighter than he expected, as if she weighed almost nothing. They walked slowly through the corridors, Jake supporting her weight and guiding her around other pedestrians. When they reached the medical station, Jake explained the situation to the staff. They seemed reluctant at first, especially when they saw the woman's appearance, but Jake insisted. Finally, they agreed to examine her and provide basic care. Before Jake left, the woman reached out and touched his hand again. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Kindness is never wasted, young one," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "Remember that. What you do when no one important is watching, that is who you truly are." Jake felt a strange shiver run down his spine. There was something odd about the way she said it, as if she knew something he didn't. But he smiled and nodded. "You take care of yourself, okay?" She smiled back. And for just a moment, Jake could have sworn her eyes glowed slightly. A soft silver light that faded as quickly as it appeared. He blinked and it was gone. He must have imagined it. As Jake walked back toward his quarters, he felt good despite the encounter with the Valorians. He'd done the right thing. That's what mattered. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change everything. He had no idea who that woman really was. And he certainly had no idea that he'd just been tested by one of the most powerful beings in the entire galaxy. The old woman watched him go, and her smile widened. She had found what she was looking for. 3 days passed quickly. Jake fell into a routine of attending classes about alien cultures, practicing different languages, and exploring the station. He'd almost forgotten about the old woman in the marketplace. Almost, but not quite. Something about those silver eyes kept coming back to him in quiet moments. But he pushed the thoughts aside. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Jake was eating breakfast in the human quarters when the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and an announcement in multiple languages echoed through the station. All personnel were ordered to remain in their designated areas. The station was going into lockdown. Jake's supervisor, Ambassador Lisa Bennett, rushed into the common area. She was a woman in her 50s with short brown hair and the kind of calm authority that came from decades of diplomatic work. But right now she looked worried. "Everyone stay calm," she said to the dozen humans gathered in the room. "There's a situation developing. We don't have all the details yet, but it's serious." "What kind of situation?" asked Kyle, another cadet. Lisa hesitated. "There's been a report that someone very important has gone missing. The Galactic Council is meeting an emergency session. I need to attend as Earth's representative." She looked at Jake. "Morrison, you've been doing well in your observations. I want you to come with me. You'll need to stay quiet and just watch, but this will be a good learning experience." Jake nodded. though his stomach was doing nervous flips. An emergency session of the Galactic Council? That sounded bad. They made their way through the station's corridors. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw aliens rushing around, talking in urgent voices or huddled in worried groups. Security forces were visible at every intersection, and military ships were docking at the station's ports. The council chamber was a massive circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. Hundreds of seats ringed the central floor, each designated for a different species delegation. The room was already packed when Lisa and Jake arrived. They took their seats in the small human section, and Jake tried to make himself invisible. At the center of the room stood the council speaker, a wise-looking alien called a Nexian who resembled a tall, thin tree with glowing bark. The speaker raised its branch-like arms and the room fell silent. Members of the Galactic Council. The speaker's voice resonated through the chamber. We have received grave news. Queen Lyra of the Ashvari Empire has been reported missing. The room erupted in shocked voices. Aliens stood up shouting questions. Others looked at each other in fear. Jake leaned toward Lisa. Who are the Ashvari? Lisa kept her voice low. One of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They control at least 50 star systems and have military technology that makes everyone else look primitive. Queen Lyra has ruled them for over 300 years. If something's happened to her, this could start a war that would consume half the galaxy. Jake felt his mouth go dry. That sounded very bad. The speaker called for order, and slowly the room quieted down. Queen Lyra was traveling in secret on a personal journey. She did not inform her government of her destination. 3 days ago, she was supposed to return to her homeworld. She never arrived. Her ship was found abandoned near this sector. An alien Jake didn't recognize stood up. Was there any sign of attack? Piracy? Kidnapping? No, the speaker said. The ship was intact. There was no evidence of struggle. She simply vanished. Another voice rang out, this one cold and clicking. Jake turned to see the Valorian delegation standing. The leader was the same one who had mocked him in the marketplace. This station is in Valorian-controlled space, the Valorian said. Are you suggesting we had something to do with this? We are suggesting nothing yet, the speaker replied carefully. But the Queen was last tracked to this region. Before anyone could respond, the main doors of the chamber opened with a loud boom. A group of tall, elegant aliens entered, and the entire room went silent. Jake had never seen beings like these before. They stood at least 8 feet tall, with smooth skin that seemed to glow with a soft inner light. Their hair was long and silver, flowing behind them like water. They wore armor that looked like it was made from starlight itself, and they moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic. The Ashvari, Lisa whispered. The leader of the group stepped forward. She was a woman with fierce eyes and a scar across her left cheek. I am High Commander Veltara of the Ashvari Imperial Fleet, she announced. Her voice was like thunder. I speak for the Empire in the absence of our queen. She looked around the room, and Jake felt like her gaze could cut through steel. Queen Lyra has been missing for 72 hours. This is unacceptable. We demand answers, the council speaker bowed respectfully. High Commander, we are doing everything in our power to locate the Queen. Every security force on this station is searching. Not good enough, Veltara said. My people have evidence that the Queen's ship was in this sector when she disappeared. Someone on this station knows something. If our Queen is not found within 48 hours, the Ashvari Empire will consider this an act of war against our people. The room erupted again. Aliens shouted protests. Some called for calm. Others started accusing their neighbors. The Valorian leader stood up, his crystalline body reflecting the lights in sharp angles. The Ashvari cannot threaten the entire galaxy because of one missing person, even if she is your queen. Veltara turned to face him, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. One missing person? She is the queen of the Ashvari Empire. She is 300 years old and wiser than all of you combined. She has kept the peace in this galaxy for longer than most of your species have been spacefaring. If she has been harmed, there will be consequences. Is that a threat? The Valorian asked. It is a promise, Veltara replied. She gestured, and images appeared on the holographic displays around the room. They showed massive warships, hundreds of them, assembled at the edge of the sector. Each ship was the size of a city, bristling with weapons. The Ashvari fleet is ready, Veltara continued. We do not want war, but we will have answers. Find our queen or face the consequences. The meeting descended into chaos after that. Delegations argued with each other. Some aliens started leaving, presumably to evacuate the station. Others formed groups, whispering urgently. Security forces tried to maintain order but seemed overwhelmed. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. We need to get back to our quarters. This station is going to become very dangerous very quickly. As they left the chamber, Jake noticed the Valorians in a heated discussion. The leader who had mocked him looked nervous now, his crystalline face somehow conveying worry. Good, Jake thought. Maybe they weren't so confident anymore. Back in the human quarters, Lisa called an emergency meeting. Everyone listen carefully, she said. The situation is extremely serious. If war breaks out, this station will be right in the middle of it. Earth has ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate. The first transport leaves in 6 hours. Are we leaving? Someone asked. Not yet, Lisa said. I need to stay for diplomatic reasons. But the rest of you will be on that transport. Jake felt a strange pull in his gut. Something about all this felt wrong. A queen doesn't just disappear without a trace. And why would she be traveling in secret? It didn't make sense. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the crisis, about the HFY, about the threat of war. And strangely, he kept thinking about the old woman. Those silver eyes. That strange glow he'd seen or thought he'd seen. Silver eyes. The HFY had silver hair. They glowed with inner light. And Queen Lyra had been traveling in secret. Jake sat up in bed, his heart racing. No, it couldn't be. That was crazy, but what if it wasn't? What if the old beggar woman wasn't a beggar at all? What if she was the queen everyone was looking for? Jake lay back down, telling himself he was being ridiculous. But the thought wouldn't go away. It kept circling in his mind, growing stronger. By morning he knew he had to find out the truth, even if it made him look like a fool. Because if he was right, he might be the only person who could stop a war. Jake barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those silver eyes staring at him. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that he was on to something. It seemed impossible, but it also made a strange kind of sense. When morning came, Jake made his decision. He had to find that woman again. Even if everyone thought he was crazy, even if he was wrong, at least he would know for sure. The problem was that Ambassador Lisa had ordered all the human cadets to stay in their quarters until the evacuation. But Jake couldn't wait. If he was right, every hour mattered. So he did something he'd never done before. He snuck out. It wasn't hard. The security forces were focused on the main areas of the station, looking for threats or signs of the missing queen. A teenage human wasn't high on their priority list. Jake slipped out of the human quarters and made his way back to the lower marketplace. The area looked different now. Most of the vendors had closed their stalls. The few aliens he saw moved quickly, nervously, like they wanted to be somewhere else. The whole station felt tense, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. Jake went to the corner where he'd found the old woman. She wasn't there. The spot was empty except for some trash and a broken piece of machinery. He felt disappointment wash over him, but he pushed it away. He'd come this far. He wasn't giving up. He started asking around. Most aliens ignored him. Some told him to go away. But finally he found a small lizard-like alien running a fruit stand. The alien was a Drexian with green scales and large yellow eyes. "Excuse me," Jake said. "I'm looking for an old woman. She was here a few days ago, wearing torn gray robes. Have you seen her?" The Drexian looked at him suspiciously. "Why you want to know?" "I helped her before. I want to make sure she's okay." The Drexian studied him for a moment, then seemed to decide Jake was harmless. "I see her. She go that way." He pointed toward a corridor Jake didn't recognize. Down to old sections, where maintenance robots go. Nobody else goes there." "Thank you," Jake said. "You be careful, human boy," the Drexian called after him. "Bad things in old sections. Dangerous." Jake nodded and headed in the direction the Drexian had indicated. The corridor sloped downward, and the lighting got worse with every step. Soon he was in areas of the station that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Dust covered everything. Broken equipment lined the walls. The only sounds were his footsteps and the distant hum of the station's machinery. He walked for what felt like hours, checking every side room and storage area. Nothing. He was starting to think this was a waste of time when he saw light coming from an open doorway ahead. Jake approached carefully. The door led to what looked like an old observation deck. The room was small, maybe 20 feet across, with a large window showing the stars outside. And standing in front of that window, still wearing her torn robes, was the old woman. But something was different. She wasn't hunched over anymore. She stood straight and tall, and even from behind she seemed to radiate a kind of power that Jake couldn't explain. "I wondered when you would come," she said without turning around. Her voice was different too, stronger, more musical. "You're a clever boy, Jake Morrison." Jake's heart was pounding. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things." She turned to face him and Jake gasped. She looked the same, but also completely different. Her silver hair was still tangled, her robe still torn, but her eyes glowed with that silver light he'd seen before. It wasn't his imagination. She was glowing, pulsing with an inner radiance. "You're her," Jake whispered. "You're Queen Lyra." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Yes, I am." Jake didn't know what to say. 1,000 questions fought in his mind, but what came out was, "Why? Why pretend to be a beggar? Do you know what's happening up there? Your people think you've been kidnapped. They're threatening war." Lyra moved toward him, and Jake fought the urge to step back. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Power seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire. "Sit, Jake," she said, gesturing to a broken bench near the wall. "Let me explain." Jake sat, and Lyra settled beside him. She looked out at the stars, and her expression became distant, sad. "I have been queen for 317 years. She began. "I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have witnessed wonders and horrors beyond your imagination, and through all of that I have learned one truth that matters more than any other." "What truth?" Jake asked. "That the measure of a civilization is not in its weapons or its technology or its wealth. It is in how it treats those who can offer nothing in return." She turned to look at him. "Every few years I do this. I disguise myself and travel to different worlds, different stations. I become someone powerless, someone ignored. And I watch. I watch to see which species show compassion without reward. Which ones see a person in need and help simply because it's right." Jake was starting to understand. "You were testing us." "Testing me?" "Yes," Lyra said. "And not just you. I tested dozens of beings on this station. Hundreds walked past me. They saw a useless beggar and kept walking. Some looked at me with disgust. Others with pity but no action. And then you came." She reached out and touched his hand, just as she had in the marketplace. "You stopped. You gave me your food, your water. You defended me when the Valorians mocked you. You helped me to medical care even though I was a stranger who could offer you nothing. It was the right thing to do," Jake said. "Exactly," Lyra replied. "And that is why your species is special. Humanity is young, barely beginning to walk among the stars. You have no great weapons, no vast empire, no ancient knowledge. But you have something more valuable. You have compassion. You have the ability to see suffering and want to end it, even at cost to yourselves." She stood up and walked back to the window. "My people were not always as we are now. Long ago, millions of years past, we were cruel. We believed that strength was all that mattered. We conquered and destroyed. We showed no mercy, and we nearly destroyed ourselves in the process." "What changed?" Jake asked. "We learned," Lyra said simply. "We learned that true strength is not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to show restraint. The courage to show kindness when cruelty would be easier. We rebuilt our civilization on these principles, and we have survived and thrived for millions of years because of them." She turned back to Jake. "But not all species learn this lesson. The Valorians, for example, they believe compassion is weakness. They mock those who show mercy. They value only power and conquest. I have tested them many times over the centuries, and they always fail." Jake thought about the Valorian leader, sneering at him in the marketplace. "What will you do to them?" "That depends on what they do next," Lyra said. "But I can tell you this. The Ashvari Empire chooses its allies carefully. We look for civilizations that share our values. And we just found one." "Earth?" Jake asked, hope rising in his chest. "Yes. Your species passed my test, Jake. Not just you, though your actions were exemplary. I have been observing humanity for decades. I have seen your kindness, your creativity, your unwillingness to give up even in the face of overwhelming odds. You are young and inexperienced, yes, but you have the right foundation. Given time and guidance, humanity could become one of the great civilizations of the galaxy." Jake felt overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why tell me all this? I'm just a cadet. I'm nobody important." Lyra laughed, and it sounded like music. "That's exactly why I'm telling you. Because you did the right thing when you thought nobody important was watching. That's the truest test of character. What you do when you think it doesn't matter, when no one will know, when there's no reward, that's when you reveal your real self. She moved closer to him and her expression became serious. But I need you to understand something, Jake. What happens next is very important. I need you to trust me and follow my lead. Can you do that? Yes, Jake said without hesitation. What do you need me to do? Take me to the Galactic Council, Lyra said. Let them see that you found me. Let them witness what happens next. But won't you just tell them you're fine? That you were never in danger? Lyra's smile was mysterious. Oh, I'll do much more than that. I'm going to teach the galaxy a lesson about the consequences of cruelty and the rewards of compassion. And you, Jake Morrison, are going to help me change the course of history. Jake stood up, his legs shaky but his resolve firm. Okay, let's go. As they walked back through the old corridors toward the main sections of the station, Jake felt like he was in a dream. A few days ago, he'd been a nobody, a kid from Earth experiencing space for the first time. Now he was walking beside one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, about to do something that would apparently change everything. Queen Lyra, he said as they climbed the stairs, what you said about humanity. Do you really think we have a chance out here, among all these ancient civilizations? Lyra looked at him with those glowing silver eyes. Jake, I don't just think it, I know it. Because the quality you showed me, that instinct to help others, that's the rarest and most valuable thing in the universe. Technology can be learned, power can be built, but compassion, real compassion, that comes from the soul of a species, and humanity has it in abundance. The Valorians don't think so, Jake said. The walk back to the main sections of the station felt surreal. Jake kept glancing at Queen Lyra, half expecting her to disappear like a dream. But she was real, walking beside him in her torn robes, though now she moved with a grace and authority that made people unconsciously step out of her way. As they entered the more populated areas, aliens began to notice them. Whispers followed in their wake. Some looked confused. Others seemed to recognize something in Lyra, even through her disguise. By the time they reached the main corridor leading to the council chamber, a small crowd was following them. Security guards moved to intercept them. But Lyra simply looked at them with her glowing silver eyes and they froze. Something in her gaze made them step aside without a word. Jake had never seen anything like it. She commanded respect without saying a single word. The doors to the council chamber were closed. A full emergency session was apparently in progress. Jake could hear raised voices from inside, arguments in a dozen different languages. He looked at Lyra uncertainly. Should we knock or? Lyra raised her hand and the massive doors simply opened. They swung inward with a boom that echoed through the chamber, and every voice inside fell silent. The room was packed. Every delegation was present and the tension was thick enough to cut. At the center stood High Commander Veltara, facing off against the Valorian delegation. Both sides looked ready for violence. When the doors opened, every head turned. Jake saw Ambassador Lisa's face go white with shock. He saw the Valorian leader's crystalline features somehow express confusion and fear. He saw hundreds of aliens staring at the old beggar woman and the human boy. Then Veltara saw Lyra. The High Commander's fierce expression crumbled. She dropped to one knee immediately, her head bowed. "My queen," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. The other HFY in the room followed instantly, all of them kneeling. And then, like a wave spreading across the chamber, other aliens began to understand what they were seeing. They began to kneel too, species after species, until half the room was on their knees. The Valorians remained standing, frozen in shock. Lyra walked forward, her torn robes trailing behind her. Despite her appearance, she looked like exactly what she was: royalty. Power radiated from her with every step. The crowd parted before her like water. She reached the center of the chamber and looked around slowly, her silver eyes touching on each delegation. When she spoke, her voice filled the entire space, needing no amplification. "I am Queen Lyra of the HFY Empire. I have returned." Veltara rose but kept her head bowed respectfully. "My queen, we feared." "I know what you feared," Lyra said gently, "and I apologize for the worry I have caused. But my absence was deliberate. I have been conducting a test that I conduct every few years to judge the character of the species I encounter." She gestured to her torn robes. "I disguised myself as a beggar. I made myself powerless, invisible, someone who could offer nothing of value. And then I watched. I watched to see who among you would show compassion to someone who could not reward them. Who would see a person in need and help simply because it was the right thing to do. The chamber was absolutely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Lyra began to walk slowly around the room. For 3 days, I sat in the lower marketplace. Hundreds of beings passed me by. I asked for help in many languages. And do you know how many stopped? She paused. One, only one. She turned and pointed directly at Jake. This boy, this human, Jake Morrison of Earth. Every eye in the room turned to Jake. He felt his face burning red. He wanted to disappear, but he forced himself to stand straight. This boy gave me his food and water, Lyra continued. He asked if I was okay. He asked if I had family or friends to help me. And when I said I was alone, he helped me to medical care. She paused. And that is not all he did. She walked toward the Valorian delegation. They shifted nervously as she approached. Some of you may remember a scene in that marketplace 3 days ago. Some of you may have witnessed it or heard about it. The Valorian leader's crystalline body seemed to dim slightly. While this human boy was helping me, Lyra said, her voice taking on an edge of steel, he was mocked, ridiculed, insulted by members of the Valorian delegation. She stopped directly in front of the Valorian leader. You told him that compassion was weakness. That helping me was a waste of resources. You said that humanity would never survive in the galaxy because of their soft hearts. Do you remember? The Valorian said nothing. His whole body was rigid. Answer your queen, Velterra commanded, her hand moving to the weapon at her side. I remember, the Valorian finally said, his voice small. Lyra nodded. And do you remember what Jake did when you mocked him? When you called his species weak and doomed? He ignored you. He continued to help me anyway. He chose compassion over pride. He chose to do what was right even when he was being ridiculed for it. She turned back to address the entire chamber. This is the test I conduct. Not a test of weapons or technology or wealth. A test of character. A test of the fundamental values that define a civilization. She raised her voice. Humanity is young. They have only been in space for a few decades. They have no great empire, no ancient knowledge, no terrible weapons. By every conventional measure, they are weak. And yet this boy showed more true strength than species that have been spacefaring for millennia. Lyra walked back to the center of the chamber. I have ruled the Ashvari Empire for over 300 years. I have seen countless civilizations rise and fall, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the ones who survive, who truly thrive, are not the ones with the biggest weapons or the most territory. They are the ones with compassion, with wisdom, with the courage to do what is right even when it costs them. She looked at Jake and smiled. This boy represents the best of what humanity can be. And because of him, because of what he showed me, I am making a decision that will shape the future of this galaxy. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. The Ashvari Empire hereby extends a formal alliance to Earth. We will sponsor humanity's entry into the Galactic Council as full members, not just observers. We will share our technology, our knowledge, and our protection. We will help guide humanity as they find their place among the stars. The chamber erupted. Aliens jumped to their feet, shouting in amazement, anger, confusion. Ambassador Lisa looked like she might faint. Jake felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But Lyra wasn't finished. She turned back to the Valorians and her expression became cold. As for the Valorian Dominion, I have tested your species many times over the centuries. Every time you fail, you value strength over compassion. You mock kindness as weakness. You believe that cruelty is a sign of power. The Valorian delegation looked terrified now. I hereby announce that the Ashvari Empire is suspending all treaties and trade agreements with the Valorian Dominion. We will be re-evaluating our relationship entirely, and I encourage other members of the Galactic Council to consider carefully whether the Valorian values align with the kind of galaxy we wish to create. Other aliens began nodding. Jake could see the political winds shifting in real time. Species that had been allied with the Valorians started moving away from them. Delegates whispered urgently to each other. The Valorian leader finally found his voice. This is not fair. We are one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. We have earned our place through strength. Strength? Lyra's voice cracked like a whip. You think you are strong? Let me tell you about strength. The Ashvari Empire could destroy your entire civilization in a matter of weeks. Our technology is millions of years more advanced than yours. Our fleet could turn your worlds to dust." She stepped closer to him. "But we do not. Do you know why? Because we learned long ago that true strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the wisdom to show restraint. The courage to choose peace when war would be easier. That is strength. That is power, and that is something your species has never understood." The Valorian had no response. He simply stood there, humiliated before the entire galaxy. Lyra turned away from him dismissively. "This session is concluded. I will remain on the station for the next week to finalize the alliance with Earth and to meet with other delegations. All those who wish to discuss the future of the Galactic Council may request an audience." She walked toward Jake and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come, Jake Morrison. We have much to discuss." As they left the chamber with Veltara and the other Ashvari following, Jake felt like he was floating. None of this seemed real. A week ago, he'd been a nobody. Now he'd apparently just changed the course of human history by giving a beggar some food and water. In the corridor outside, Lyra finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The hard mask of royal authority softened. "You did well in there, Jake. I know that must have been overwhelming." "That's an understatement," Jake managed to say. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. "Did that really just happen? Did you really just make Earth a full member of the Galactic Council?" "I did," Lyra confirmed. "Your species has earned it." "Because I gave you a sandwich?" Lyra laughed. "Because you showed compassion when it cost you something. Because you did what was right even when you were mocked for it. Because you represent the values that truly matter." The next few weeks passed in a blur. Jake's simple act of kindness had triggered a cascade of changes that rippled across the entire galaxy. He watched in amazement as everything he'd known about Earth's place in the universe transformed overnight. Within days of Queen Lyra's announcement, ambassadors from dozens of species requested meetings with Earth's delegation. Species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence now treated them as important allies. Trade agreements were proposed. Cultural exchanges were arranged. Scientific collaborations were begun, and at the center of it all was the Ashvari Alliance. True to her word, Queen Lyra began sharing Ashvari technology with Earth. Medical advances that would have taken humanity centuries to develop on its own. Energy systems that made fossil fuels look like cave fires. Propulsion technology that would cut travel time between star systems from months to days. The gifts were staggering, and Earth scientists worked around the clock to understand and integrate them. But even more valuable than the technology was the political protection. With the Ashvari Empire backing them, Earth suddenly had a voice that could not be ignored. When the Galactic Council voted to grant humanity full membership, it was unanimous. Even the Valorians, humiliated and isolated, did not dare to oppose. Jake watched the Valorian delegation leave the station 2 weeks after the revelation. Their ships departed quietly without ceremony. Their influence on the council had collapsed. Other species had followed the Ashvari lead and suspended their agreements with the Valorians. It would take them decades to rebuild their reputation if they ever could. Commander Zethkar, the Valorian who had mocked Jake, was removed from his position. Jake heard later that he'd been reassigned to a remote outpost on the edge of Valorian space. The lesson had been learned, though Jake took no pleasure in the man's downfall. He just hoped the Valorians would eventually understand what Queen Lyra had tried to teach them. For Jake himself, life became surreal. He was no longer just another cadet. Overnight, he'd become famous across Earth and known throughout the galaxy. News networks called him a hero. Social media exploded with his story. Millions of people were inspired by the simple message, kindness matters. But the attention was overwhelming. Jake struggled with it. He didn't feel like a hero. He'd just helped someone who needed help. That's what anyone should do, shouldn't they? Ambassador Lisa helped him navigate the chaos. "You're a symbol now," she told him gently. "Whether you wanted it or not. People need to believe that doing good things matters. You proved that it does." 3 weeks after the revelation, Queen Lyra invited Jake to visit the Ashvari homeworld. Earth's government enthusiastically approved. A small delegation was assembled with Jake as the guest of honor. The journey took only 2 days in an Ashvari ship, which moved through space in ways Jake couldn't understand. The ship seemed to bend space around it, making distance meaningless. When they emerged from the final jump, Jake pressed his face against the viewing port and gasped. The Ashvari homeworld was beautiful beyond words. It was a planet of silver and blue, with vast oceans and continents covered in cities that glowed like captured starlight. Orbital rings surrounded the world, and ships moved between them in graceful patterns. Moons hung in the sky, 3 of them, each one transformed into a garden world. The capital city was called Luminara, and it took Jake's breath away. Buildings that seemed to be made of solidified light rose into the clouds. Gardens filled with plants that glowed in the twilight lined every street. Waterfalls fell from impossible heights, their mist creating rainbows in the air. And everywhere he looked, he saw HFY people, tall and graceful, moving with that characteristic elegance. Queen Lyra met them at the royal palace, a structure that seemed to float above a mountain lake. She was dressed in formal robes now, silver and blue, with a crown of light resting on her head. But when she saw Jake, she smiled warmly, and he saw the same woman who'd sat in that dark corner of the marketplace. "Welcome to HFY," she said. "Welcome to my home." She took him on a personal tour of the palace, showing him wonders that Jake knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. Gardens where flowers sang. Libraries where knowledge was stored in crystals of light. Halls where the walls showed the history of the HFY people, stretching back millions of years. But the most important moment came on the 3rd day of his visit. Lyra invited him to a private meeting in her personal study, a quiet room overlooking the city. "Sit, Jake," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. "There's something I need to tell you." Jake sat, curious and a little nervous. Lyra smiled. "You've been wondering, I know. Wondering if I was really testing just for the reasons I said. Wondering if there was more to it." "Maybe a little," Jake admitted. "You're perceptive," Lyra said. "The truth is, my test serves 2 purposes. The first is what I told the council, to judge the character of species and individuals. But the second purpose is something I've never told anyone." She leaned forward. "Jake, I have ruled for over 300 years. I am tired, not of living, but of the burden of leadership. The HFY people need a queen, but I need rest. I have been searching for a long time for a sign, a reason to believe that the galaxy will be in good hands when I eventually step down." "You're going to retire?" Jake asked. "Eventually, yes, but I needed to know that there were still species in this galaxy who valued the right things, who would carry forward the principles that keep civilization alive. I needed hope, Jake, and you gave that to me." She reached out and took his hand. "When you stopped to help that beggar, when you defended her against mockery, you showed me that humanity represents something precious, something worth protecting and nurturing. You gave me hope that when my people eventually pass the torch to younger civilizations, those civilizations will be worthy of the responsibility." Jake felt tears in his eyes. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right." "Exactly," Lyra said softly. "That's what makes it special. You didn't help me because you knew who I was or what you might gain. You helped me because your heart told you it was right. That's the kind of character that changes the galaxy." She stood and walked to the window. "The HFY were once cruel and destructive. We nearly destroyed ourselves, but we learned. We changed. And now we have survived and prospered for millions of years. Your species is young, Jake. You will make mistakes. You will face challenges that seem impossible. But if you hold on to that compassion, that fundamental decency, you will not just survive, you will thrive." Over the next few days, there were formal ceremonies. Jake was honored before the HFY Council. He received medals and titles that he didn't fully understand, but more importantly, he got to know Queen Lyra as a person, not just a ruler. She told him stories about the galaxy, about species that had risen and fallen, about the long history of civilization among the stars. On his last night on HFY, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the city. The 3 moons were rising, casting silver light over everything. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "I mean, I know Earth is a member of the Council and we have this alliance, but what does that mean for people like me? Regular people?" Lyra smiled. "It means opportunity. It means Earth's people will spread among the stars. You'll establish colonies, form relationships with other species, learn and grow and become part of the galactic community. It means your children and grandchildren will grow up in a universe full of possibilities that you could barely imagine. And the Valorians? Will they cause trouble?" "Perhaps," Lyra admitted. "They are proud and stubborn. But they have learned a lesson, even if they don't want to admit it. And if they do cause trouble, they will find that the galaxy no longer tolerates bullies as it once did. Your story has inspired many species to reconsider their values. She looked at him. Jake, I want you to understand something. What you did was not just about Earth or the Ashvari. It's about the future of civilization itself. Every few generations, the galaxy needs a reminder of what truly matters. You provided that reminder. The effects will ripple forward for centuries. Jake shook his head in wonder. All because I gave someone food and water. All because you saw a person in need and chose to help, Lyra corrected. That's the first choice of civilization. Everything else builds on that foundation. When Jake returned to Earth, he was greeted as a hero. Parades were held. He gave speeches and interviews. Schools named buildings after him. But through it all, he tried to stay grounded. He remembered what his mom had always told him, and what Queen Lyra had confirmed. That real character is shown when nobody important is watching. 6 months later, Jake was back at the station where it all began. He'd been appointed as a junior liaison to the Galactic Council, working directly under Ambassador Lisa. He was walking through the marketplace, now much busier and more prosperous thanks to Earth's new trade agreements, when he saw a young alien child begging for food. Without hesitation, Jake stopped and gave the child his lunch. A few aliens walking by noticed and smiled. One, a Drexian merchant, nodded with approval. You set good example, human, the merchant said. Jake smiled. I'm just doing what's right. As he walked away, he thought about Queen Lyra's words. About how the choice to help others was the foundation of civilization. About how,